Hi, I'm EJ Kane. I'm here to talk about running a sandbox-style campaign using Pathfinder Second Edition. In this video, I'm going to run through some considerations for a sandbox game and how I run my sandbox campaign, and make adjustments to Pathfinder 2e to achieve my goals. First, what do I mean by a sandbox game? I think this is best described as playing a world, not a predefined story. There's no specific ending to reach towards. There's no adventure path, a predetermined set of adventures for this campaign. The story will be an emergent property of the player character's choices and how the world reacts to them. As a GM in a sandbox campaign, you are playing the world itself and need to make that world feel vibrant, believable, and worth exploring. The key component here is player-driven narratives. The stories and adventures are based on PC motivations and goals. Thus, as a GM, rather than trying to get your players to care about a particular quest for an adventure that you want to run, you instead need to design quests and adventures around the motivations and goals of the player characters. Let's go over a few of the major features of a sandbox campaign. The first is high encounter variance. Though the focus of the story is upon the player's characters, the world does not revolve around them. Consequently, the relative difficulty and challenge of encounters may be randomly determined. Here is a table I use to generate encounters for my adventures. As you can see, it allows for a wide range of encounter difficulties. Some encounters may seem trivially easy, while others will be threats well beyond the character's collective ability. Logic and randomness determine the strength of an encounter. Discretion will be required by the players, and for a Pathfinder game, paired with judicious use of recall knowledge to understand the threat. We'll talk more about this later. Treasures and rewards. Logic and randomness also determine the prevalence of any treasure and magic items found within the adventure. The players cannot count on a specific handout of monetary and magical rewards over their character's career. For a Pathfinder game, this change will require a few adjustments. We'll talk more about those later too. Quests and XP. Experience points cannot be taken lightly in this style of gameplay. How you choose to reward XP will ultimately create the focus and drive of the campaign. In my sandbox game, I wanted the players to focus on accepting and completing character-driven quests, so I reward most of the XP from completing these quests. The players determine what quests are important to their characters, and then we add them to our quest log, a shared quest log, and when completed, I reward them XP for doing so. XP from encounters is relatively smaller than a typical game. If in your sandbox game you want to encourage the slaying of monsters, then make that the largest source of XP. If you want the classic OSR treasure-focused game, then make the greatest source of XP from gathering treasure. How you choose to reward the XP will often be what your players choose to focus on. When it comes to experience points and levels, in my campaign, I wanted to slow down progression and make earning a new level feel like a major accomplishment. To slow down progression, I increase the required XP for the next level. It is usually 1000 XP to reach level 2 in Pathfinder, and I still keep that for level 2. But you need 1100 XP to reach level 3, 1200 XP to reach level 4, and so on. You're free to adjust this for your own campaign, but perhaps the normal progression works well for you. A major component of a sandbox game is the ability for PCs to have an impact on the world at large, beyond just their adventures. This is usually achieved through downtime and strongholds. Since players are driving this campaign, they choose what they want to take downtime for their characters and when they want to take it. They may also want to start organizations or businesses in the game world. These activities are often encouraged in sandbox campaigns. In my campaign, I'm using the teams and room systems from the first edition Pathfinder book, Ultimate Campaign. I just adjust the gold cost to be about 10% of what is listed. We don't spend a ton of session time on downtime and stronghold building, but it is an important backdrop to the story. In my sandbox campaign style, players might have more than one character that come and go as the story dictates. This allows them to bring in a new character while their previous character is expanding their stronghold or organization or doing other downtime activities. In my campaign, my players are free to bring in new characters at any time, although the new characters do start at level 1. Players are free to swap between characters between adventures, but can typically only play one character at a time. unless there's a strong story reason for them both to participate. Okay, so you want to run a sandbox-style campaign. So why choose Pathfinder Second Edition? Why not use another system better suited for this type of gameplay? Well, first of all, you can play this type of campaign with any system, so it's best to choose the system that you and your players love to play. For my group, we love the deep teamwork-based tactical combat of Pathfinder 2e. This is a system property that is hard to replicate elsewhere. Additionally, the skill and proficiency system of Pathfinder lends itself well to these stories, with a few adjustments. We'll talk more about these adjustments later in this video. Another nice feature of Pathfinder 2e is that the system is so incredibly balanced that players are more free to choose non-optimal, story-driven choices for their characters, without feeling like they're letting the group down. My players love this aspect, as they love to choose mechanical choices that tie directly into their character's evolving story. Pathfinder's archetype dedications are a perfect example of this design choice. You can roleplay any aspect of your character, but there is something special when the mechanics of the game highlight a story-driven feature of your character. The numerous options in Pathfinder make this easy to accomplish. So you know you want to play a sandbox campaign with Pathfinder 2e. How do you get started? First, it helps to have a session 0, and work with your players to create characters, and more importantly, define how those characters are each connected to each other. A good glue helps to get the story started. Remember, they may be bringing in new characters throughout the campaign. It helps if there is a binding story element that enables this. For example, in my campaign, the first group of characters started a mercenary guild when they reached level 3. This was a perfect way to introduce new characters. They let about 3 months of downtime go by, and then they all brought in new first level characters, who all were new employees of this mercenary guild. So they were now in a situation where their veteran level 3 characters were assigning missions to their new first level characters. As a binding agent, you could use a shared hometown, a shared school or academy, or any other similar backdrop to help tie any new characters to existing characters in the story. Now, how can you make Pathfinder 2nd Edition better suited for this campaign style? The answer is in the system-supported variant rules. I'll go over each of the variant rules I use in my campaign and why I use them. Your needs might be different, and all of these choices might not fit the type of campaign you wish to play. The first major variant I use is proficiency without level. This variant simply removes level from the proficiency equation, from both the PCs and the monsters they face. If you want players to be able to bring characters of varying level together, this variant will smooth out those differences and allow low-level characters to still be able to significantly contribute to their party. If you don't use this variant, they would not allow characters of more than 1 level difference in the party. I use proficiency without level with the untrained modifier of -2 to further separate the gap between trained and untrained characters. Taking away level from the equation makes a character's proficiency training and associated attribute be the most important contributor to any die roll. To use this system, you might need to make some adjustments. Displayed here are the modified simple and level-based DC charts that I use. I also want my characters to be able to easily restore hit points between encounters using the medicine skill and the treat wounds action. Therefore, I set the DCs for this action lower than might be expected. I also set the DC for the aid action to 16. This variant also has the consequence of making the game feel grittier, as low-level enemies can still be a threat, and high-level characters feel less superheroes and more grounded. My players and I like this aspect, as we prefer a grittier, more realistic tone to our game. Your mileage may vary with your players. One problem with using this variant is that I have found that boss and mini-boss encounters seem less dangerous and impactful, because they no longer have that inherent level difference to make them seem more formidable by just the numbers. This is easily remedied. Rather than choosing very high-level enemies, I just make a few adjustments. For mini-boss encounters, I simply give the enemy an inherent +1 to all their checks and DCs. This is the equivalent to them being 1 level higher than the PCs, based on the old math of not using this rule variant. I make these adjustments after flattening their numbers based on the proficiency without level variant rule. For a true boss encounter, I will typically grant a +2 bonus to all checks and DCs. Effectively, the PCs will be about 10% less effective against the enemy, creating that tension and frustration that usually accompany these encounters when you're not using this rule variant. I have found that these numeric adjustments are better than using enemies many higher levels than the PCs, since those enemies will simply deal way more damage and have way more hit points, making the encounters unnecessarily deadlier and longer. The next variant rule I use is automatic bonus progression. My campaign setting of Endless is a relatively low magic setting. Magic is rare, and magic users are frightening and misunderstood. Priests in my setting are simply orators rather than divine magic using clerics. As a consequence, magic items are rare as well. Unfortunately, Pathfinder 2e's math expects certain item bonuses at certain levels. Thankfully, the automatic bonus progression system simply grants characters these expected bonuses when they need them. I like this system because it allows me to maintain my low magic setting while maintaining the math of the game system. It also grants characters additional tangible mechanical benefits for each level they gain. Since gaining levels is harder in my campaign, the rewards are even sweeter. When a character reaches level 2 and gains that attack potency, that +1 to all attacks is a nice tangible benefit for surviving to level 2. This variant also allows my characters not to have to worry about buying magic items, just to stay above the math of the game. Their characters are free to spend that gold on story components, like the rooms and teams of their stronghold, or buying influence with merchants and nobles. Gold becomes less of a meta currency for character bonuses, and more of a tangible power in the campaign's world. One final benefit is that as a GM, I can create interesting magic items that fit the lore and story of the quests, rather than forcing to meet the math requirements of the PCs. Here I find that relic abilities in the GM core to be a particular usefulness for magic item design. Do not use this variant if your players prefer their magic items to feel numerically powerful, or would rather these bonuses coming from their items. Just be sure to give out the necessary items at the appropriate levels instead. The next variant I use is gradual attribute boosts. This variant simply spreads out the 4 ability boosts typically gained at levels 5, 10, 15, and 20. Instead, characters get 1 boost at levels 2 through 5, 7 through 10, etc. I like this variant because it gives players additional immediate benefits with each level up. Getting to choose an attribute at each level is a sweet reward for earning that next level. While it does make characters a little stronger at lower levels, but with all the other changes I make, it balances out pretty well. This variant also lessens that massive boost in power at levels 5, 10, and 15, smoothing out character progression. If you prefer this major tier milestone, then do not use this variant. The next variant I use is a homebrew rule to make the game feel grittier and darker in tone. I call this rule Wounds and Injuries. With this variant, when a character reaches Dying 2 for the first time in an encounter, they must make a DC 10 Fortitude save. As you can see here, critically failing this save results in permanent death due to a life-threatening injury. Failure results in a chronic injury that may last up to 2 weeks in the game world. Success, and the character has a temporary injury that may last a couple days. As you can see on the screen, these injuries can range from quite punitive to a minor nuisance, depending on which injury a character sustains. I like this variant because it makes teamwork even more important to ensure that players do not go into Dying 2, and are thus hindered by an injury for the rest of the adventuring day. Also, the fact that these injuries can last many days encourages the players to reassess the dungeon foray, perhaps return to town to recover, or even swap one injured character for another. This variant definitely makes the game harder and encourages players to constantly assess the group's survival chances, and to be more willing to regroup and make a secondary foray into the dungeon. Which, as a GM, allows me to make changes and bring life to that adventure location. Do not use this variant if your players do not enjoy this level of difficulty, or prefer their characters seem more heroic and less vulnerable. The next rule variant is a homebrew rule for recall knowledge. The base game is not very clear how this action is supposed to work. So here's how I use recall knowledge at my table when it comes to creature identification. A success immediately grants the level and any traits of the creature. This is important in my game since due to the high encounter variance, the PCs need to assess how dangerous an enemy is before they choose to confront it or decide if they should flee. A success also allows them to choose one of the following: the enemy's highest or lowest defense, all of their immunities, weaknesses, and resistances, or any one relevant special ability. A critical success allows them to gain 2 pieces of information. Subsequent recall knowledge checks allows them to learn more, but at an increasing DC. This clarification of recall knowledge makes it useful for the players to assess threats and decide how to deal with them. The next homebrew variant relates to hero points. First of all, we allow players to spend a hero point before a roll to allow them to take the better of the two rolls, to essentially gain a fortune effect. This allows players to really choose which rolls are important to them. The second change is that we do not grant hero points at the beginning of a session, except the first session. Rather, at the end of the session, each player can give one hero point to another player, and we often have them explain why they are giving it to them. Sometimes it's for an amazing role-playing scene, other times for saving that character's life, whatever the reason. I like this change because it allows each player to provide positive feedback to each other and encourage each other for better role-playing and teamwork. I do not let players have more than 2 hero points to carry on to the next session, so that players are encouraged to use them. I tend to reward a few hero points throughout the session, typically for in-character expositions, backstory expositions, or any time players help build the story. These are the things that I want to reward in my sessions. Okay, now I want to share my own thoughts and ideas for how to run my sandbox campaign. Let's start with oracles. I'm deriving this term from the Ironsworn RPG, but it's simply another name for random tables. I use a lot of oracles and random tables to help me generate content for my game. Most of this happens between sessions, as I'm trying to consider what enemy factions are doing, or I want to add another wrinkle to an existing storyline. Occasionally, my players will throw me for a loop, and I generate a few quick ideas during a session, but then I define it in more detail between sessions. I use a lot of sources for my oracles and random generation. I highly recommend the following sources. The Mythic GM Emulator version 2 is a great resource that always sits by me during the game. I use the actions table and character motivations tables often to help flesh out my NPCs. The random event table is great to add some spice to an ongoing session. I also consult the newly revised Tome of Adventure Design when putting together an adventure. I'd also highly recommend Justin Alexander's book, So You Want to Be a Game Master. It has a lot of helpful components for adventure design, as well as does his blog, The Alexandrian. I also often consult tables in the Ironsworn RPG and Delve supplement, as well as the succinct tables of Mouse Rats and Forbidden Lands. Use whatever sources you can find. Also, the goal with these tables is to get your creative juices flowing, not necessarily to bind you to a particular outcome. Use logic and knowledge of your campaign world to help narrow your choices. I also use a lot of custom tables I made specifically for Pathfinder 2e. I will share a link in the description to documents of these tables. As you can see here, these are used for encounter design, random dungeon rooms, and random treasure. The level in these tables refer to the average party level, but it may also sometimes refer to the level of the location, irrespective of the level of the PCs. Encounter design in my game allows for greater level variety. I want there to be encounters that the players will often have to decide to run away from. That hesitancy and discretion was often a hallmark of OSR-style games. In my game, XP from encounters is reduced, thus lessening the desire to face dangerous encounters. I take the XP for an encounter and divide it by the number of characters, then multiply by 2. There are also adjustments for PC level if there are different level of PCs in the group, such that lower level PCs get more XP than high level PCs. Since I'm using extreme encounters in my design, it is important to provide plenty of forewarning to the players. It is unfair to just throw these encounters without giving them proper warning. Show signs of the monster beforehand. Allow them to recall knowledge before they're rolling initiative and fending for their lives. If they fail to identify the creature, or they proceed headlong into danger, then throw them into initiative with the monster. Even then, I might softball the monster for a round or two to allow them to flee. Killing characters outright is rarely fun for anyone. Another important consideration for a sandbox game is world design. In my campaign, we are playing in a 20-year-old setting that has changed and evolved over the course of many campaigns. This makes my job as a GM easy because the world is quite defined, and my players are familiar with it. This isn't required, however. It is perfectly okay to let your sandbox game world expand and grow as the campaign progresses. Let the players participate in the world building. Perhaps the player of a cleric creates a new deity for your setting, or a character hails from a far-off land that then becomes a part of your growing world. Many of the elements in my own campaign setting came from players' choices in past campaigns, slowly shaping the world with each character and campaign in that setting. it might be tempting to design an entire world ahead of time. It will be far more rewarding for your players and you to discover and shape your campaign world slowly over the course of your sandbox campaign. Start small and expand as needed. Many sandbox campaigns begin in a small village surrounded by some wilderness and the rumor of a dungeon or two. Let the campaign world evolve naturally from there. The best advice I can give to a sandbox GM is don't over-prepare. You only need to be a session or two in front of your players. It might be tempting to flesh out an entire multi-level dungeon because you had an NPC mention it during the last session. Unless your players confirm that they are heading to that dungeon, there is no reason to flesh it out yet. Let the ideas percolate and gather until you need to iron out the details. Talk with your players at the end of each session and make them state their intentions for the next adventure so you can adequately prepare. They will understand that you need this information. It is an important trade-off for having a truly open world. Before I close out this video, I wanted to share how I track information in my sandbox campaign. These campaigns can contain a lot of ongoing quests, factions, and world information. I'll share how I keep it all together. I use Foundry Virtual Tabletop for my game sessions, so I also use it to organize my notes, both for me and my players. You don't need to use a VTT, you can do this with paper as well, but here's just how I do it. So here are the components of a storyboard I created in Foundry. First, we have the quest listing. This is a list curated by the players for quests that they have heard about and they are interested in. Some of these pertain to individual characters and their backstories, others the Mercenary Guild missions from patrons. We usually mark the quests that they're currently on with a token. I also list each player character and that character's main motivation, their current goal, and their current activity. The activity is important if they're not with the current party. At the start of each session, I will often ask players what their off-screen characters are up to, and sometimes we have small role-playing scenes related to these activities. The focus, however, stays with the current adventuring party. Here I track the players' organizations, whose characters are whose, and any followers and companions. This is sort of a one-stop shop for organizing the PC's strongholds and organizations. Next is the listing of enemy NPCs and factions. This list is open to my players, but sometimes there are hidden elements where they have a faction opposed to the PCs, but the PCs aren't aware of it yet. Foundry lets me hide text and tokens from the players, so I can still store all the information in secret at the same place. Here I have each NPC and faction, and some information about their goals or connection to the party. I often have their current activity in hidden text as well. I will often consult this list during downtime breaks and between game sessions to determine what these factions and NPCs have been up to off-screen. I have a similar list of allies and neutral factions. These are other NPCs the players have interacted with. And I also keep a small collection of important PCs, but that maybe aren't fully relevant to the ongoing story, just so we keep track of them and don't forget about them. I also track various NPCs and locations on our city map, where the player's Mercenary Guild is located. They use this city as their base of operations. Likewise, we have a larger regional map with the various adventure sites listed on the map. These are the tools that I use to track the information about the ever-growing campaign. It is important to take time between sessions to consider the activities of the factions and other world events. Make the world feel alive and real. Are two nations about to go to war? Is there a drought in a nearby region? Add these tidbits of information throughout the campaign to make the world feel alive outside of the player character's adventures. These tidbits might lead to larger hooks for future adventures and completely change the nature of the world backdrop. If two natures go to war, what does that mean for the PCs? Are they drafted to fight for their nation? Do they flee to avoid any obligations? Don't let the world itself become an unchanging backdrop to the adventures of the PCs. While this video is long enough, I hope you can find these tips and tricks helpful as you try to put together your own sandbox campaign using Pathfinder Second Edition. Cheers and thanks for watching, and have a wonderful day.